My name is Cassandra Mitchell, 28, and the moment I walked into that courtroom, everything changed. My mother laughed under her breath, my father shook his head, and I knew I was truly on my own. 8 years of law school and a promising career as a public defender had led to this moment, facing off against my own family to defend a woman they saw as collateral damage to their investments. Claritech Industries had hurt my client, but exposing them meant betraying my parents. As I clutched my briefcase tighter, I realized some battles choose us, not the other way around. Before I dive deeper into this story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you believe that standing up for what's right sometimes means standing against your own family. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this impossible situation unfolded. I grew up in Westport, Connecticut, in a house that screamed old money and privilege. 5 bedrooms, a pool that was only used during summer parties, and a 3-car garage that housed vehicles worth more than most people's homes. My mother, Elaine Mitchell, was the chief financial officer at a multinational investment firm, a position she'd earned through ruthless dedication and a calculated approach to everything in life. My father, Richard Mitchell, was a founding partner at Mitchell, Harrington, and Weber, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in New England. From the moment I showed any aptitude for academics, my future was mapped out. I would attend Yale like my father, go to Harvard Law, then join the family business of representing corporations, mergers, and the kind of clients who had buildings named after them. The Mitchell legacy, my father would say, swirling his scotch at dinner parties, is built on exceptional legal minds who understand how the world actually works. For most of my childhood, I absorbed their worldview without question. Success was measured in billable hours and year-end bonuses. Justice was whatever you could convince a judge it was. The system worked exactly as it should for people like us. Then came my undergraduate ethics course at Yale. Professor Diane Franklin assigned us to observe arraignments at the local courthouse. I watched as defendant after defendant appeared before the judge without adequate representation, their court-appointed attorneys overworked and underprepared. I saw how quickly lives could be derailed by a system that functioned at 2 very different speeds. One for those who could afford my father's $800 an hour rate, and another for everyone else. That day changed everything for me. I still went to Harvard Law as planned, but much to my parents' confusion, I focused on criminal defense and social justice courses. During my second year, I interned at the public defender's office in Boston. It's good experience, I assured my increasingly concerned parents. All the best attorneys understand both sides. They nodded, convinced it was a phase. After all, their daughter was simply building a more rounded resume before joining the family firm. When I announced my decision to accept a position as a public defender in Hartford instead of the waiting junior partnership at my father's firm, the temperature in our family home dropped 20 degrees. "You're throwing away everything we've built for you," my mother said, her voice glacial with disappointment. "This isn't a game, Cassandra," my father added. "You can't save everyone, but you can secure your own future." My younger brother Marcus, 4 years behind me in law school and firmly on track to join my father's firm, was the only one who seemed to understand, even if he didn't agree. "You always were the idealist," he said during one of our rare phone calls. "Just don't burn your bridges completely, okay? Not everyone has your courage." The first 3 years as a public defender were exactly as difficult as I'd been warned. Overwhelming caseloads, limited resources, and clients who'd been failed by virtually every system meant to protect them. But for every 10 heartbreaking losses, there was one victory that made everything worthwhile. A mother reunited with her children, a young man getting treatment instead of incarceration, moments where the system actually worked the way it was supposed to. Then Jessica Ramirez walked into my office. A single mother of 2 working 3 jobs, she had been exposed to industrial chemicals while cleaning at a Claritech Industries facility. Her respiratory problems had left her unable to work, buried in medical bills, and facing eviction. The company had offered a settlement that wouldn't even cover her existing hospital expenses, contingent on signing an ironclad NDA. "They know what they did," Jessica said, her voice still raspy from damage to her lungs. "They just think nobody will fight for someone like me." I took her case immediately, planning to sue Claritech for negligence and personal injury. It wasn't until I was preparing the initial filing that I realized the connection. Claritech Industries was a major holding in my parents' investment portfolio. My mother sat on the board of a company that had significant shares in Claritech's parent corporation. For a moment, I considered recusing myself due to potential conflict of interest, but there was no actual legal conflict here, only a personal one. Jessica needed someone who would fight for her, and the professional ethics I'd sworn to uphold transcended family loyalty. I still held out hope that my parents would understand, that they would recognize that my professional obligations were separate from family dynamics, that the values of justice and fairness they'd claimed to instill in me would matter more than their investment returns. I was wrong. Sunday dinners at my parents' home had continued despite our career differences. It was an unspoken truce. I wouldn't bring up my charity cases, as my mother called them, and they wouldn't pressure me about joining the family firm. We'd discuss neutral topics like Marcus's progress in law school, local politics, or the extensive renovations my parents were making to their vacation home in Vermont. That particular Sunday in October seemed no different at first. The housekeeper had prepared my father's favorite roast. The wine was flowing, and even my mother seemed less frosty than usual. It wasn't until dessert that I noticed something off in their behavior, shared glances, my father clearing his throat more than usual, my mother's smile not quite reaching her eyes. "So, Cassandra," my mother said casually as she served the apple pie, "I hear you've taken on a case against Claritech Industries." The room went still. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. "How did you know about that?" I asked. The filing had only been submitted 2 days prior. Hartford's a small legal community, my father interjected smoothly. "Word gets around. Especially when it's my daughter opposing Frederick Weber's son," my mother added. Frederick Weber was my father's law partner, and apparently his son was now representing Claritech. I wasn't aware of the connection, I said, which was partially true. I knew my parents had investments, but not that Weber's son would be opposing counsel. "But it doesn't change anything about the case." "Actually, it should," my father said, setting down his wine glass with precision. "You should recuse yourself due to conflict of interest." "There's no legal conflict, Dad. I don't have any personal stake in Claritech." "No, but we do," my mother said sharply. "Significant ones. Your father sits on the board of their parent company's legal committee. I'm an investor. This looks bad for everyone involved." Marcus, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly became very interested in his dessert. "So I should abandon my client because it might create awkward conversation at the country club?" I asked, feeling heat rise in my face. "Don't be dramatic, Cassandra. There are plenty of other attorneys who could take this case," my father said. "Not who would give it the attention it deserves. Not who would refuse to be bought off." My mother's perfectly manicured nails clinked against her wine glass. "Speaking of which, your father and I have been talking. Mitchell, Harrington, and Weber is expanding its pro bono division. We'd like to offer you a position heading it up." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you trying to bribe me to drop this case?" "We're offering you a way to do the work you care about without creating a rift in this family," my father corrected. "Full autonomy, your own budget, and a partner track. You could help far more people with those resources than you can now." The offer was tempting in its way. The resources of a major firm behind causes I believed in. But I knew the strings that would be attached, the compromises that would be expected, and the timing made the true motivation transparent. "And all I have to do is abandon Jessica Ramirez," I said flatly. "A woman who can't breathe properly anymore because your client cut corners on chemical safety." "You've always chosen strangers over family," my mother said, her voice cold. "Always the crusader. Never considering how it affects the people who actually care about you." "Care about me? Or care about what I can do for the family reputation?" I pushed back from the table, looking to Marcus for support. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My father's face hardened. "All that education wasted on lost causes. There are systems in place, Cassandra. Not everyone can be saved. And not every corporation is the villain in your social justice narrative. Just the ones you profit from, right?" I grabbed my purse and stood up. "Jessica Ramirez has 2 children who depend on her. Claritech knew those chemicals weren't properly contained. They've had 3 other similar cases that they've settled quietly. This isn't about me being a crusader, it's about basic accountability. You're making a mistake. My mother called after me as I headed for the door. Family should come first. I guess we have different definitions of loyalty, I replied, not looking back as I walked out. In my car, the tears came hot and fast. I'd known they wouldn't be supportive, but I hadn't expected such a blatant attempt to make me choose between my principles and my family. The worst part had been Marcus's silence. The brother who'd once told me he admired my courage hadn't said a word in my defense. My phone rang just as I pulled into my apartment complex. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "I'm sorry," he said before I could speak. "I should have said something." "But you didn't," I replied, the hurt still fresh. "They've been talking about the case all week, Cass. They're worried about the publicity more than the money. Dad's up for managing partner next year, and a family scandal could hurt his chances. So his career ambitions trump a woman's right to compensation for damages?" Marcus sighed heavily. "You know how they are. Just be careful, okay? They're not going to let this go easily." After we hung up, I sat in my darkened car, thinking about Jessica Ramirez and her children, about the medical reports showing chemical damage to her lungs, about the internal Claritech emails I'd already obtained showing they'd been warned about ventilation problems in the area where she worked. I'd lost my family's support, but I was more determined than ever to see the case through. I had no idea just how far they'd go to stop me. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days after the family dinner. I arrived at the public defender's office to find my assistant, Kyle, frantically searching through filing cabinets. "The Ramirez documentation is missing," he said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I had it organized on your desk yesterday before I left, but it's gone." We turned my office upside down looking for it, checked other attorneys' desks, the copy room, even the recycling bins. Nothing. Thankfully, I had scanned most of the critical documents and stored them on our secure server. Except when I logged in, the files were corrupted. According to our IT department, a system glitch had affected several files, but somehow only my cases had unrecoverable damage. I had backups on my personal drive, but the coincidence felt too convenient. The next blow came when Maria Lopez, a key witness who had worked alongside Jessica and experienced similar symptoms, called to withdraw her testimony. "I'm sorry, Miss Mitchell," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't be involved anymore." "Maria, your testimony is crucial. Did something happen?" A long pause. Someone from the company called. "They know about my immigration status, about my cousin who isn't documented. I have to think about my family." One by one, our witnesses backed out. Evidence became harder to obtain. A request for Claritech's internal safety reports that should have been a routine discovery matter was tied up in procedural motions. Then I saw the name on the opposing counsel's latest filing, Richard Mitchell, Jr., partner, Mitchell, Harrington, and Weber. My own father had taken over the case. I confronted him at his office, bypassing his surprised secretary with a family privilege she couldn't deny. He was on the phone when I entered, but quickly ended the call. "Cassandra, this is unexpected. You're representing Claritech now, personally? What happened to Weber's son?" My father leaned back in his leather chair, the picture of corporate confidence. Jason was overloaded with other cases. Since I'm familiar with the situation, it made sense for me to step in. Familiar with the situation? You mean familiar with me and how to manipulate this case? I mean familiar with the actual facts, not the emotional narrative you've constructed. He slid a folder across his immaculate desk. Claritech has commissioned 3 independent studies showing their chemical levels were within OSHA guidelines. Your client likely had pre-existing conditions. I left the folder untouched. You know that's not true. And what about the witnesses being threatened? The missing files? Was that your doing too? Something flickered in his eyes, not guilt, but perhaps surprise that I would accuse him directly. I fight my cases in the courtroom, not through underhanded tactics. Though I can't speak for everyone involved, he straightened his tie. Your mother, for instance, was quite upset after our dinner. She may have called in some favors. The casual admission stunned me. You're telling me Mom is interfering with my case? I'm telling you that your actions have consequences for this family. Claritech is a major client of this firm. Your mother sits on boards with their executives. Marcus's future position here could be affected. All because you won't step back from one case. Back at my office, my boss, District Attorney Franklin Harris, called me into his office. A political appointee with aspirations for higher office, Franklin had always been more concerned with optics than justice. Mitchell, I'm getting calls about the Ramirez case. Significant calls from people who fund my campaigns and the public defender program. Are you taking me off the case? I asked directly. He adjusted his glasses nervously. I'm suggesting it might be in everyone's best interest if you handed it to someone without your personal complications. My personal complications give me insight into how Claritech operates and how they'll defend themselves. I'm the best attorney for this case. You're also the most liability. Think about your career, Cassandra. There are powerful people who can ensure you never advance beyond your current position. I left his office with the case still mine, but with the clear understanding that I was now fighting this battle alone. Even my colleagues gave me a wide berth, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire of what was clearly becoming a high-stakes war. The only person who stood by me was Tara Wilson, a paralegal who had joined the office around the same time I had. With her help, we recovered most of the missing documentation and rebuilt our case file. When I returned from court one afternoon to find a note on my desk that simply read, "Drop the case or regret it," it was Tara who convinced me to document everything for a potential ethics complaint. "They're scared," she said as we worked late into the night. "Powerful people don't resort to intimidation unless they know they're vulnerable." She was right. Through diligent research, we discovered that Claritech had been cited 3 times by environmental agencies but had buried the reports through settlements and political connections. Jessica's case wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. The more obstacles they threw in my path, the more determined I became. This wasn't just about one client anymore. It was about a system that protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. It was about my own integrity as an attorney and as a person. But as the pressure mounted, I had no idea that the professional attacks were about to spill over into my personal life in ways I couldn't have anticipated. "You're going to be late again, aren't you?" Alex's voice carried that resigned tone I'd come to dread. My boyfriend of 2 years had been understanding about my unpredictable schedule as a public defender, but the Ramirez case had pushed his patience to its limits. "I'm sorry. The deposition ran long, and I need to review these safety reports before tomorrow." I cradled my phone against my shoulder while sorting through documents spread across my kitchen table. "I can meet you at the restaurant by 8? The reservation was for 7, Cassandra. The reservation I made a month ago for our anniversary." I closed my eyes, the guilt hitting me like a physical weight. I had completely forgotten. "Rain check for tomorrow night? I promise I'll make it up to you." His sigh carried 2 years of accumulated disappointments. "Sure. Whatever." He hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, knowing I should call back, should prioritize the relationship that had been my emotional anchor through the turbulence of my career. Instead, I turned back to the reports. Jessica's hearing was in 2 days, and nothing could take precedence over being prepared. By the time I made it home the following night, exhausted but determined to salvage things with Alex, another bombshell was waiting. He sat on my couch, an unfamiliar stiffness to his posture. "We need to talk," he said, the 4 words no one ever wants to hear. "I know. And I'm so sorry about last night. I've cleared my schedule for Saturday, the whole day just for us. This isn't about the missed dinner." He couldn't meet my eyes. "Your parents contacted me." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "What? When?" "Last week. Your father called my office, then invited me to lunch." "You had lunch with my father and didn't tell me?" The betrayal stung sharper than I expected. I thought he wanted to discuss something else. Maybe even... He trailed off, and I knew he'd thought my father was asking for his intentions, perhaps giving some old-fashioned blessing. What did he want? Alex shifted uncomfortably. "He wanted me to talk to you about the case. Said it was causing problems for everyone involved, and that you might listen to me since you weren't listening to family." "And what did you say?" "I told him, I support your work. But Cass, he made some points about the toll this is taking. On you. On your family relationships. On us. Maybe he's not entirely wrong. I stood up, anger replacing the initial shock. So you've been sitting on this for a week? What? Building up the courage to deliver my father's message? It's not like that. I care about you. And you're running yourself into the ground over this case. You're not sleeping, you're barely eating. You've missed 9 dates in the past month. Your mother called yesterday, too. My mother called you? He nodded miserably. She suggested I might be able to get through to you where they couldn't. She mentioned that your future inheritance could be affected by how this plays out. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't so effective. They had identified my relationship as a potential pressure point and didn't hesitate to exploit it. And now you're delivering their message. Surrounded by concerns about my well-being, of course, but ultimately asking me to prioritize my inheritance and their comfort over my client. That's not fair, Cassandra. I've supported your career choices from the beginning. I've never asked you to be someone you're not. No. You've just waited until I'm in the fight of my professional life to suggest I back down. Waited until my parents got to you to suddenly have concerns. The argument escalated. Old frustrations mixing with new betrayals. By midnight, Alex was packing an overnight bag. I love you, Cass, but I can't compete with this case. Or maybe it's not even the case. Maybe it's the crusade. The constant need to prove yourself against your parents' expectations. That's not what this is about, I protested. But even to my own ears, the words lacked conviction. Call me when this is over. When you figure out if there's room in your life for something besides battle. The door closed behind him with devastating finality. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and isolation. I lost 7 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. Sleep became a luxury as I woke from stress dreams where I was unprepared in court or discovered my case files had been replaced with blank pages. Dark circles became a permanent fixture under my eyes, prompting concerned looks from Tara and even some of my other colleagues. You need to take a break, Tara insisted one evening as we prepared our arguments. Even just a weekend. This case won't be served by you collapsing in court. I'm fine, I insisted, though we both knew it wasn't true. I'd nearly fallen asleep during a client meeting that morning, and my hands had developed a slight tremor from the excessive caffeine keeping me upright. That night, alone in my apartment, I hit a wall. The documents blurred before my eyes, my notes stopped making sense, and for the first time, I wondered if I was fighting a losing battle. Claritech had resources I couldn't match. My own family was actively working against me. I had lost my relationship, was risking my professional standing. And for what? A case that might be dismissed on procedural grounds before Jessica ever got her day in court? I was seriously considering calling my father to discuss a settlement when my doorbell rang. Jessica's 13-year-old daughter, Marisol, stood on my doorstep, clutching a folder. Mom's back in the hospital, she said, her young face too serious for her age. She wanted me to give you these. The folder contained hospital bills, insurance denials, and a handwritten letter from Jessica. The medical expenses had now exceeded $80,000. Their landlord had begun eviction proceedings. Jessica's younger child had taken on a paper route to help with groceries. Mom says to tell you she understands if it's too much. Marisol said with dignity beyond her years. She knows powerful people are involved. I looked at this child, forced to deliver her mother's medical documents because Jessica couldn't afford childcare during her hospital stay. Forced to contemplate homelessness because a corporation had decided that proper ventilation was too expensive. Forced to grow up too soon because the system was rigged against families like hers. Tell your mom I'm not backing down, I said. A new resolve hardening within me. Not now. Not ever. After Marisol left, I called Tara with a new plan. If my family wanted to play dirty, we needed to be smarter. We needed to go around their interference rather than through it. An unexpected ally appeared the next day, Wallace Harrington, one of my father's senior partners who had been my mentor during law school. He called me to his office under the guise of discussing a potential settlement. Your father doesn't know about this meeting, he said once we were alone. I've watched this situation unfold with growing concern. Concern for the firm's reputation? I asked warily. concern for the integrity of the legal profession. He slid a flash drive across the desk. This contains documentation about 2 prior incidents at Claritech facilities. Cases that were settled quietly with ironclad NDAs. I represented one of those clients before the Mitchell name was added to our letterhead. I stared at the flash drive, hardly daring to believe it. Why are you giving me this? Because some lines shouldn't be crossed, even for clients who pay our exorbitant fees. Use it carefully, Cassandra. I'll deny this meeting ever happened. With renewed determination and unexpected support, I returned to preparation for the upcoming court date. The betrayals had taken their toll, but they had also clarified exactly what I was fighting for and why it mattered so much. What I didn't know was that the worst betrayal was yet to come. From the person I least expected. The list of witnesses for Claritech's defense arrived by courier on a rainy Tuesday morning. I scanned it quickly, noting the expected parade of corporate experts and character witnesses designed to undermine Jessica's credibility. Then, a name at the bottom of the page stopped my heart. Marcus Mitchell. My brother was going to testify against my client. Against me. I drove to his apartment in a fog of disbelief, barely registering the traffic or the persistent drizzle that had soaked through my blazer by the time I pounded on his door. When he opened it, the guilt on his face confirmed everything. You're testifying for Claritech? I didn't bother with pleasantries. What could you possibly have to offer their case? He stepped back to let me in, running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture we'd both inherited from our father. It's complicated, Cass. Enlighten me. I remained standing, too angry to accept the seat he offered. I've been interning at Blackstone Financial for my business law credits. They're a major investor in Claritech's parent company. He couldn't meet my eyes. They want me to testify about the company's safety compliance record. You have no first-hand knowledge of their compliance. This is character testimony dressed up as expert witness. I've reviewed their safety reports as part of my internship. The firm is considering bringing me on full-time after graduation. The pieces clicked into place. So that's it? They dangled a job and you agreed to help bury Jessica's case? Your own sister's case? Marcus finally looked at me, anguish evident in his expression. Mom and Dad made it clear that if I don't support the family on this, I can forget about their connections, their recommendation letters, everything. Dad said he'd make sure no firm in Connecticut would touch me. They're blackmailing you with your future. The realization made me sick, and you're letting them. Not everyone can afford principles, Cassandra. We're not all willing to burn our lives down for strangers. Jessica Ramirez isn't a stranger to me anymore. And this isn't about principles in the abstract. It's about a corporation that hurt people and doesn't want to face consequences. Marcus paced the small living room of his apartment. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. You've always been the strong one, the one who could stand up to them. I'm not like you. Clearly, I said. The word like ice between us. You know what you're doing is wrong, but you're going to do it anyway. I don't have a choice. We always have choices, Marcus. You're just making the easy one. I left his apartment feeling completely alone. My parents' opposition I had expected, even prepared for. But Marcus had been my ally, my confidant. His betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. That night, I broke down in Tara's apartment, the weight of everything finally crashing down. The case, my family, Alex, the constant battle just to do my job. It all poured out between sobs that seemed to come from some bottomless well of grief. I can't fight my entire family and a corporation, I admitted in a moment of despair. Maybe I should look for a settlement. Something that would at least cover Jessica's medical bills. Tara listened patiently, then handed me a tissue and a glass of wine. First, cry it out. You're entitled. Then remember why you took this case. As my tears subsided, Tara revealed something else. I've been doing some digging. Your parents have been monitoring your work email. That's how they knew about witness interviews, deposition schedules, all of it. They've probably been following your case strategy step by step. That's illegal. How did you find this out? IT guy owes me a favor. He found suspicious access patterns and traced them back to Mitchell, Harrington, and Weber's servers. This violation of my privacy, of attorney-client privilege, was staggering. But it also meant we had an advantage they didn't know about. We knew they were watching. We need to create a secure strategy they can't access, I said, professional instincts kicking back in through the emotional fog. A parallel case they won't see coming. Over the next few days, Tara and I worked from her apartment using burner laptops, building our case on handwritten notes and secure communications. We found evidence that Claritech had known about chemical leaks for months before Jessica's exposure. Internal emails revealed executives discussing the cost of proper ventilation versus potential settlements, coldly calculating that legal payouts would be cheaper than facility upgrades. 3 nights before the trial, my phone rang just after midnight. "Marcus, I can't do it," he said without preamble, his voice raw. "I can't testify against you. What changed your mind?" I was too exhausted for anger, but caution kept me guarded. I saw the preliminary questions Weber's team prepared for me. They want me to imply you're pursuing this case for personal reasons, to embarrass the family. They're planning to use me to attack your professional integrity. The depths to which they would sink shouldn't have surprised me anymore, but somehow they still did. "I have something that might help you," Marcus continued. "I made copies of emails between Claritech executives and their safety inspectors. They show the company falsified reports after Jessica's incident." Hope surged through me. "Why would you risk your career to get these?" There was a long pause. "Because you're my sister. Because despite everything, I know you're doing the right thing. And because I don't want to become the kind of lawyer who helps cover up harm to people like Jessica." It wasn't a complete redemption, but it was a start. With Marcus's documents and our parallel strategy, we had a fighting chance against Claritech and the combined forces aligned against us. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like optimism. But courtroom battles are unpredictable, and I was about to face the most difficult moment of my professional life. The morning of the trial dawned bright and clear, a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside me. I'd prepared as thoroughly as humanly possible, rehearsed every argument, anticipated every objection. Yet uncertainty gnawed at me as I reviewed my notes one final time over coffee that I couldn't taste. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "They know I gave you documents. Dad confronted me last night, said I had to choose between family business or being disowned. I'm sorry, Cass." The message confirmed my worst fears. Marcus had flipped again, unable to withstand the pressure our parents had applied. I couldn't blame him entirely. They had decades of experience wielding influence and manipulation. But the timing couldn't have been worse. The courthouse steps were crowded with local media, unusual for a civil case, but someone had tipped them off about the family drama aspect. Jessica waited for me inside, her face pale but determined despite the oxygen tube in her nose. Her children sat behind her, Marisol holding her younger brother's hand. "Whatever happens today," Jessica said quietly, "thank you for fighting when everyone told you not to." The courtroom doors opened, and my heart stuttered. My mother sat in the front row behind the defense table, elegant as always in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Beside her were 2 Claritech executives I recognized from my research. And there, at the defense table, my father and 2 other senior partners from his firm. 3 attorneys for a case that would typically warrant one. They were sending a message about resources and determination. My father didn't look up as I entered, but my mother's eyes found mine immediately. As I walked past, she laughed under her breath, a soft sound of derision that cut through the courtroom murmurs. My father glanced up then, meeting my gaze for a moment, before shaking his head slightly and returning to his notes. That moment crystallized everything: their absolute confidence, their dismissal of me as a worthy opponent, their certainty that family loyalty should have trumped professional ethics. I clutched my briefcase tighter, the weight of Jessica's trust steadying me as I took my place at the plaintiff's table. Judge Harriet Coleman entered, her reputation for no-nonsense efficiency preceding her. After preliminary instructions, I delivered my opening statement, focusing on corporate responsibility and the human cost of negligence. I kept my voice steady, my arguments clear, even as I felt my parents' eyes boring into me. Then my father rose for the defense. His commanding presence filled the courtroom as he methodically laid out a narrative portraying Jessica as an opportunist with pre-existing conditions, and Claritech as a model corporate citizen being unfairly targeted. The strategy was exactly what I'd expected. Attack the plaintiff's character, minimize corporate responsibility, create doubt about causation. What I hadn't expected was his subtle implication that I had personal motivations for pursuing the case. The plaintiff's counsel, he said with practiced gravity, seems determined to find corporate malfeasance where none exists, perhaps driven by ideological rather than legal considerations. The morning proceeded with initial witnesses, each exchange feeling like a chess match. For every point I scored, my father's team countered with expertise and resources I couldn't match. Judge Coleman's expression gave nothing away as she listened to both sides. At the lunch recess, I sat alone in a courthouse conference room, too tense to eat the sandwich Tara had brought me. Through the window, I could see my parents and the Clara Tech executives gathered on a nearby bench, talking animatedly. My mother laughed at something, one of the executives said, then caught my eye through the window and pointedly turned away. I overheard two clerks passing in the hallway. Mitchell's family is celebrating at Maxwell's tonight, one said. Her father already made reservations for 15 people. They were planning their victory dinner before the case had even properly begun. The presumption staggered me, not just confidence, but absolute certainty that they would prevail. That all their maneuvering and interference had guaranteed an outcome in their favor. Returning to the courtroom after lunch, I felt a crushing weight of doubt. What if they were right? What if I had been naive to think I could win against such organized opposition? Jessica deserved better than a lawyer fighting a personal family battle alongside her case. The afternoon session began with the defense calling their expert witnesses, safety inspectors, medical consultants, all testifying to Clara Tech's exemplary record and the unlikelihood that Jessica's condition resulted from their chemicals. Each one was polished, credential-heavy, and clearly well compensated for their testimony. I cross-examined as effectively as I could, but with each witness, I felt the case slipping away. The courtroom seemed to close in around me, my parents' presence an oppressive force at my back. This wasn't just a legal defeat looming, it was the confirmation of everything they had ever said about my career choices. That when it truly mattered, I couldn't deliver justice to the people who needed it most. Then the courtroom doors opened quietly, and a woman I didn't recognize walked in. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, she took a seat in the back row. My father, in the middle of questioning a witness, faltered slightly before regaining his composure. My mother turned, saw the woman, and visibly stiffened. I had no idea who she was, but her effect on my parents was unmistakable. As the defense concluded their questioning, Judge Coleman called for a 15-minute recess. The mystery woman approached me as I gathered my notes. Miss Mitchell? Eleanor Blackwood. I was your father's law partner, before the firm added Mitchell to its name. Recognition dawned. Eleanor Blackwood had been a legendary attorney before her unexpected retirement 5 years ago. My father had mentioned her occasionally, always with a mixture of respect and relief that she was no longer his competition. I need 5 minutes of your time, she said, her voice low and urgent. In private. In the conference room, Eleanor wasted no time. Your father pushed me out of the firm I helped build because I wouldn't compromise on a case similar to yours. A chemical exposure at another Clara Tech facility. She placed a flash drive on the table between us. This contains evidence they've fought to keep buried for years. Safety reports that were falsified, internal emails discussing the cost-benefit analysis of proper ventilation versus settlements. I stared at the drive. Why are you giving me this? My daughter was exposed to similar chemicals at a different facility. She's been on dialysis for 3 years now. The settlement barely covers her medical care. Eleanor's composed facade cracked slightly. I let them silence me with an NDA and a retirement package. I've regretted it every day since. If you testify or if I use this evidence, they'll come after you legally. She straightened her shoulders. Let them try. I've kept documentation of every ethical violation I witnessed during my time at the firm. I was saving it for leverage, but some things matter more than comfortable retirement. When court resumed, I called Eleanor Blackwood to the stand as a surprise witness. My father objected immediately, But Eleanor's status as a former insider with direct knowledge of Claritech's practices gave Judge Coleman grounds to allow limited testimony. What followed was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Eleanor methodically outlined how Claritech had established a pattern of negligence, concealment, and intimidation across multiple facilities. She presented documentation showing similar cases that had been quietly settled, creating a damning picture of corporate callousness. My father's cross-examination was aggressive, questioning Eleanor's motives, her memory, her professional judgment, but she remained unflappable, meeting his hostile questions with calm precision. "Mr. Mitchell, I've known you for 30 years, she said at one point. I taught you most of what you know about corporate defense, but I never taught you to place profit above human health. That's something you learned on your own." The dynamic in the courtroom had shifted palpably. Judge Coleman was paying closer attention. The jury seemed more engaged, and most tellingly, the Claritech executives were passing urgent notes to my father. Then came the moment that truly turned the case. To my complete surprise, Marcus was called to the stand, not by the defense, but by the court itself. Judge Coleman had questions about the documents that had mysteriously appeared in evidence. Under oath, facing both our parents' glares, Marcus found his courage. He testified to the authenticity of the documents he had provided, confirmed that Claritech had knowingly falsified safety reports, and admitted to being pressured by our parents to testify against me. "They told me family loyalty should come before everything," he said, his voice gaining strength. "But I think true loyalty means holding each other accountable to be our best selves." My father rose to object, but Judge Coleman shut him down immediately. "Counsel will refrain from interrupting witness testimony." In the gallery, my mother stood abruptly and walked out, unable to watch as her carefully constructed plan unraveled. One of the Claritech executives followed her, while the other leaned forward to whisper urgently to my father. The rest of the day passed in a blur of testimony, objections, and increasingly desperate maneuvering by the defense. By the time I delivered my closing argument, focusing on corporate responsibility and the human cost of putting profit before safety, the mood in the courtroom had transformed. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with a verdict in Jessica's favor. The compensation awarded was 3 times what we had initially sought, enough to cover her medical expenses, lost wages, and provide security for her children. In the courthouse hallway afterward, my father passed me without a word. The family breach was now complete and public. But Jessica's tearful thanks and the sight of Marisol's relieved smile reminded me why it had all been worth it. The victory felt hollow in some ways. I had won the case but lost my family. Yet, as I watched Jessica hugging her children, I knew I had made the right choice. Some principles truly were worth fighting for, even at tremendous personal cost. The courtroom reconvened after lunch, the tension so thick it seemed to have physical weight. I had just begun questioning our next witness when the courtroom doors opened. Eleanor Blackwood, my father's former law partner, entered with measured steps. The subtle shift in my father's posture told me everything I needed to know. Her presence was significant and unwelcome. Judge Coleman called a 15-minute recess, during which Eleanor approached my table. "Miss Mitchell," she said formally, though her eyes conveyed urgency, "I believe I have information relevant to your case." In the private conference room, Eleanor wasted no time. "I was senior partner at Harrington and Blackwood before your father joined and the firm was renamed. I handled a case against Claritech 6 years ago that was quietly settled." She placed a flash drive on the table between us. This contains safety reports that Claritech falsified after chemical exposure incidents at 3 different facilities. Internal emails discussing cost-benefit analyses of proper safety measures versus potential settlements. Risk assessments that explicitly acknowledged the dangers that affected your client. I stared at the small device, hardly daring to believe what she was offering. "Why would you risk your reputation to help this case?" Eleanor's professional composure slipped momentarily, revealing something raw beneath. "My daughter Amelia was exposed to similar chemicals at their facility in Bridgeport. She developed kidney failure as a result. She's been on dialysis for 3 years." "I'm so sorry," I said, genuinely moved. "I let them silence me with an NDA and a generous retirement package," she continued. bitterness edging her voice. They buried the evidence that might have helped others like your client. I've lived with that compromise every day since. If you testify, they'll come after you legally, the NDA. Let them try, she said, steel returning to her voice. I've kept documentation of every ethical violation I witnessed during my 27 years at the firm. I was saving it as insurance, but some things matter more than comfortable retirement. Back in the courtroom, I called Eleanor Blackwood as a surprise witness. My father objected immediately, rising to his feet with barely controlled fury. Your Honor, Miss Blackwood has no relevance to these proceedings. This is clearly a desperate attempt to introduce prejudicial information. Judge Coleman regarded him coolly. Given Miss Blackwood's former position and her direct knowledge of similar cases involving the defendant, I'll allow limited testimony. The objection is overruled. Eleanor took the stand with the dignified bearing of someone who had commanded courtrooms for decades. She methodically outlined Claritech's pattern of negligence and cover-up, presenting documentation that corroborated Jessica's claims about inadequate safety measures and corporate knowledge of risks. During my father's cross-examination, his usually measured courtroom demeanor cracked. You're violating a legally binding agreement, counselor. Your personal vendetta against this firm is clouding your professional judgment. Eleanor met his hostility with calm precision. Richard, I've known you for 30 years. I mentored you when you were an associate. I taught you most of what you know about corporate defense. But I never taught you to place profit above human health. That moral compromise was entirely your own innovation. The gallery erupted in murmurs, forcing Judge Coleman to call for order. The Claritech executives were visibly agitated, passing urgent notes to their legal team. Then came the moment that truly turned the tide. Marcus was called to the stand, not by either legal team, but by Judge Coleman herself, who had questions about the chain of custody for certain documents that had mysteriously appeared in evidence. Under oath, facing both our parents' glares, Marcus found his spine at last. He testified to the authenticity of the documents he had provided, confirmed that Claritech had knowingly falsified safety reports, and admitted to being pressured by our parents to testify against me. They told me family loyalty should come before everything else, he said, his voice steadying as he spoke. But I think true loyalty means holding each other accountable to be our best selves. My father stood to object, but Judge Coleman silenced him with a sharp gesture. Counsel will refrain from interrupting witness testimony. In the gallery, my mother rose abruptly and walked out, unable to watch as her carefully orchestrated plan unraveled. One of the Claritech executives followed her, while the other leaned forward to whisper urgently in my father's ear. The energy in the courtroom had transformed completely. The jury, previously impassive, was now fully engaged, several members taking extensive notes. Judge Coleman's neutral expression had given way to focused attention on each piece of evidence. I delivered a closing argument that focused not on family drama but on corporate responsibility and the human cost of prioritizing profit over safety. By the time the jury retired to deliberate, there was a palpable sense that justice might actually prevail. They returned after just 4 hours, lightning fast for a complex civil case. The verdict came in. Claritech was found negligent, and the compensation awarded to Jessica was 3 times what we had initially sought. In the courthouse hallway afterward, Jessica hugged me with tears streaming down her face. You fought for me when no one else would, she said. You gave my children their mother back. As the crowd dispersed, I saw my father standing alone by the elevators. Our eyes met across the marble corridor, and for a moment, I thought he might approach. Instead, he gave a slight nod, not of reconciliation, but perhaps of reluctant professional respect, before the elevator doors closed between us. Eleanor approached as I gathered my things. Your parents will come around eventually, or they won't. Either way, you've proven yourself a better attorney than either of them today. Thank you for taking the risk, I said. Your testimony made all the difference. Sometimes the hardest cases aren't about legal complexity, but about finding the courage to stand for what's right, even when it costs you. She handed me her card. When you're ready for a change, call me. I'm starting a new firm, focusing on environmental and personal injury cases. We could use someone with your principles. As I walked out of the courthouse, the The weight of the past months both lifted and transformed. I had lost my family but found my voice. The path forward would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, it was truly my own. 6 months after the verdict, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have predicted. The settlement money had enabled Jessica to receive the specialized treatment she needed. Her health had improved enough that she could spend time with her children without supplemental oxygen, and Marisol had been accepted to a college prep program. Her tuition secured by a portion of the settlement funds. I had left the public defender's office and joined Eleanor Blackwood's new firm, Blackwood & Associates. We specialized in environmental justice and personal injury cases, particularly those involving corporate negligence. My victory against Claritech had brought a steady stream of clients with similar stories, people who might otherwise have been steamrolled by corporate legal teams. My small office overlooking the Hartford skyline was a far cry from the cramped space I'd occupied as a public defender, but I'd kept the same framed quote on my wall. "Justice is what love looks like in public, Cornell West." It reminded me daily of why I'd chosen this path. Tara had joined the firm too, now as a paralegal supervisor overseeing a team of 3. Her organizational skills and unwavering ethical compass had made her indispensable during the Claritech case, and Eleanor had recognized her value immediately. "The Martinez deposition is scheduled for Thursday," Tara said, poking her head into my office one autumn afternoon. "And your brother called again. 3rd time this week." My relationship with Marcus had been slowly rebuilding. After the trial, he'd faced the full force of our parents' disappointment, but had found it surprisingly liberating. He'd declined the position at my father's firm and instead taken a job with the state attorney's office, focusing on white-collar crime. We met for coffee that weekend at a small cafe halfway between our apartments. The awkwardness that had characterized our early post-trial interactions had gradually given way to something closer to our old rapport, though the shadow of betrayal hadn't completely dissipated. "I'm thinking of getting my own place," he said, stirring his latte absently, moving out of the apartment they pay for. "Big step," I acknowledged. "Have you told them?" "Not yet. Dad's actually been different since the trial. More distant, but also less controlling in some ways. Like he's reassessing." This aligned with my own limited observations. My father had sent a copy of a legal journal featuring an article about the Claritech case, with a post-it simply reading, "Well argued." Not an apology, but something adjacent to respect. My mother remained firmly estranged, unable or unwilling to separate my professional choices from what she perceived as personal betrayal. The family holidays I'd once endured out of obligation now passed without invitation or acknowledgement. "I saw Mom last week," Marcus offered cautiously. "She asked about you. What did she want to know?" "If you were well. If the new firm was successful." He shrugged. "Small things. But it's the first time she's mentioned you without changing the subject immediately after." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a hairline crack in what had seemed an impenetrable wall of rejection. I was surprised by how much even this minimal interest affected me. Alex and I had reconnected too, though not romantically. We occasionally met for lunch, our conversation easier now that we'd both acknowledged we wanted different things. He was dating someone new, a pediatric nurse whose schedule was as unpredictable as his, creating a shared understanding that had been missing between us. "Your parents were right about one thing," he said during one of our lunches. "You are stubborn as hell." But they were wrong about that being a flaw. The most unexpected development came from Eleanor's continued mentorship. She'd introduced me to a network of attorneys focused on corporate accountability, and together we were building cases that addressed systemic issues rather than just individual grievances. "You're building quite a reputation," Eleanor remarked after we won our 3rd consecutive case together. "The corporate defense teams are starting to mention you specifically in their preparation meetings." "How do you know that?" I asked, curious. She smiled enigmatically. "I still have friends in unexpected places, including a junior partner at your father's firm who keeps me informed." The work was challenging and often emotionally taxing, but it provided a fulfillment I'd never found in the public defender's office, where overwhelming caseloads had sometimes made meaningful justice feel impossible. Now I could select cases carefully, give them the attention they deserved, and actually affect change beyond individual outcomes. One Tuesday morning, my assistant informed me that someone was waiting in the reception area. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. I walked out to find a middle-aged woman with a bearing that immediately reminded me of my mother. The same confidence, the same careful attention to appearance, but with a vulnerability my mother would never allow herself to display. Miss Mitchell? My name is Margaret Thornton. My daughter worked for Meridian Pharmaceuticals. She's been experiencing symptoms similar to your client in the Claritech case. As I listened to her story, I recognized the familiar pattern: corporate negligence, worker illness, attempts to minimize liability. But I also saw something I'd come to understand more deeply since the Claritech case. Behind every corporate malfeasance were individual decisions made by people who looked remarkably like my parents and their social circle. People who weren't evil but who had compartmentalized ethics from expediency, principles from profit. We can help you, I assured Margaret. But you should know that these cases can become personal. The companies fight back hard, and they're not above targeting aspects of your life beyond the case itself. I understand the risks, she said, her expression reminding me startlingly of my mother again. But my daughter deserves someone who'll fight for her. After she left, I stood looking at the framed courtroom sketch on my wall, a gift from Tara capturing the moment the verdict had been announced in the Claritech case. Jessica's relieved expression, my father's tight-lipped disappointment, my own stunned vindication. The day everything had changed. I understood now that breaking family cycles required not just courage but acceptance of loss. Some bridges stayed burned by necessity. But I'd also learned that family could be chosen as well as born, formed through shared values rather than shared DNA. Perhaps someday my parents would come to understand why I'd made the choices I had. More likely, they never would. I had made peace with either outcome. The intercom buzzed. Jessica Ramirez is on line 1, my assistant announced. She says it's good news about her latest test results. I smiled as I reached for the phone. This was the victory that mattered. Not against my family, but for the people who needed an advocate. The moment I'd walked into that courtroom and my mother had laughed under her breath and my father had shaken his head had been a turning point. But it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of my own. So I ask you, have you ever had to choose between family expectations and what you knew was right? What helped you find the courage to make that difficult choice? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps me continue sharing stories of standing up for what's right, even when it comes at a personal cost. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most authentic path forward.